Hi everyone, my name is Bruce Moravchik and welcome to the NOAA Planet Stewards September webinar. Today we'll be hearing from Jessica Handy, Education Coordinator from Kiss the Ground, and Whitney Cohen, the Education Director for Life Lab. And again, I'm Bruce Moravchik, Coordinator of the NOAA Planet Stewards Education Project, along with my colleague Molly Harrison. And we're very welcome to be joining you here this evening. So before we begin, as we do, let's go through some introductory slides and let's begin our process here. So the first thing is that tonight's broadcast is being recorded and a link to this video archive will be distributed within a week. If you don't receive a link to the archive, send me an email. All you need to do is put request link September 4, 2018 webinar into the subject line. Also, a video archive and all the slides presented tonight and a previous broadcast going all the way back to 2013 are currently available on the NOAA Planet Stewards Google website. And if you can't access the site, you can send an automatic access request through Google, or you can email me with the subject line request access to PSEP Google site. Now, as we do for these broadcasts, all attendee microphones will be muted. If you'd like to ask a question, please type it into your GoToWebinar control panel. And furthermore, during tonight's broadcast, you'll be receiving an email during the broadcast with a link to a post-webinar poll. I'll be reminding you after the broadcast to open up your email, go in, take the poll. It won't take you more than a minute or two, but your responses do provide us with essential information and help us to prepare for future events. Also, for everyone who attends the full hour, we will be issuing you certificates of attendance for 1 contact hour of professional development through the NOAA Planet Stewards Education Project. And I have 2 announcements. One announcement is that NOAA Planet Stewards, in collaboration with the National Earth Science Teachers Association, will be holding a series of 4 webinars at the end of this month. These are all elementary school. It's our elementary school level webinar series. We'll have students in the lead, game design for learning earth science with our colleague Peg Steffen. We'll have simulations and models for teaching earth system science with Randy Russell from UCAR. We'll have Get Serious About the Weather, teaching students about extreme weather and preparedness with Mary Fairbanks, a meteorologist from NOAA's Weather Service. And we also have Raising the Bar, the Oyster Bar, engaging students with NOAA's 3-dimensional oyster learning sequence. We'll have that with our colleagues Bart Merrick and also Molly Harrison, the other coordinator of our program. And for all that series that's going to be occurring at the end of September, all the webinars will be starting at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, so a different time slot than we're used to. Finally, we want to let you all know about our next book club, Junkraft, An Ocean Voyage and Rising Tide of Activism to Fight Plastic Pollution. This is a terrific book. It is going to be on Monday, October 22nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And you don't have to register for this. All you have to do is dial in the number and dial in the passcode, and you're in. But I will tell you that spaces are limited. Now, if you have any questions about the book, any questions about the topic, any questions about anything about the book club, please send an email to Molly Harrison, Molly.Harrison@noaa.gov. She will answer your questions about that. Or, you can drop a line to me and I'll help you too. But Molly's running the book club, which is terrific. Now, having offered you those announcements, and I have some other announcements at the end of our presentation, I would like to turn it over to our presenters, Whitney Cohen and Jessica Handy. So Jessica and Whitney, if you guys can. Okay, we've got your mics unmuted. And Whitney, I'm going to give you the presentership. And I would like to introduce you guys pretty briefly. So Jessica Handy, uh, who was the education director for Kiss the Ground, is a mother and registered dietitian nutritionist, an RDN. Her interest in health began at a young age when she witnessed the ill effects of poor eating habits had on those she loved most. She spent much of her career in public health, helping to increase access to healthy foods in underserved communities and empowering families to take an active role in their health. After starting a home garden, she began to learn firsthand the profound connection that nutrition has to agriculture, an experience that completely transformed her mission as a nutrition educator. She now serves as the education coordinator for Kiss the Ground and is an advocate for soil health because, simply put, healthy soil grows healthy food makes healthy people. Now, Whitney Cohen is a teacher, trainer, and author with tremendous commitments to and expertise in inquiry and place-based education, strategies for engaging diverse learners, school gardens, and the intersection between environmental education and public schools. As the education director of Life Lab, a national leader in garden-based education, Cohen presents hands-on workshops to educators and leads a National Leadership Institute for school garden support organizations. She's also written activity guides, including the Book of Gardening Projects for Kids, Food Corps Sprout Scouts, and the American Heart Association's Teaching Garden Guide. Cohen is a former middle school science teacher and currently teaches teaching environmental education at the University of California, Santa Cruz. She received her BA from Vassar College in Sustainable Community Development and her master's degree from University of California, Santa Cruz in Education. And with that, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bruce. We can probably speak on behalf of Whitney from Life Lab and Kiss the Ground that we're extremely thrilled about this opportunity to be featured on the Planet Stewards webinar as a guest. So thank you for this opportunity. I want to start off our presentation by doing some quick acknowledgements before we dive into this exciting curriculum, soil story curriculum. This curriculum could not have been made possible without our partners at Life Lab. Their amazing just guidance in the development of this definitely couldn't have been made possible. As well as our curriculum sponsors, Jenna and Michael King Foundation, Organic India, PSEP, and our webinar sponsor, BioBag. So just want to acknowledge our sponsors before we dive into this curriculum. So we will go to our next slide. So as you all know, when you,
I'm just making sure you're seeing it. Yeah, okay, we're good. Go ahead.
Okay, excellent. So as you all know, this is a webinar that will go through the kind of the educational platform of the soil story curriculum that was developed in partnership with Life Lab. It's a 5-unit curriculum that is in alignment with next generation science standards that really helps middle schoolers dive into the understanding of the role that soil plays in human health, climate, and our food, the food that we eat. It's a really important connection that a lot of people aren't aware of, and we saw it as a really amazing opportunity to teach middle schoolers about the connections. So our agenda for this evening, just so you have an idea of how we will spend the time together, we will go through quick introductions, which I know Bruce did an amazing job introducing us, so we won't spend too much time on that. But we'll also dive into why is it so important that we regenerate our soil, kind of the foundation as to why we even developed this soil story curriculum. And then we will go through the 5 lessons in the curriculum and dive into the science behind each lesson, the sequence of activities, and do reflections and a Q&A. And as Bruce mentioned, we will have some polling periodically throughout the presentation that you'll have an opportunity to engage and give some responses. So don't forget to utilize that fun feature throughout the webinar.
Jessica,
Yeah, so I know Bruce did an amazing job presenting, kind of giving a background of who we are. And so I'm going to briefly go through this again, in that my background, I'm a registered dietitian, and I serve as an education lead for Kiss the Ground. Also now consider myself a soil advocate. Soil wasn't a part of the conversation when I was in school as a registered dietitian. But now understanding through the work that I do with Kiss the Ground, and even a little prior to that, just understanding the deep connection that soil has on human health, the environment, and the food that we eat. It's such a solid foundation, and it needs to be a part of the conversation when we talk about nutrition and in our environment. And I also serve as an outdoor educator in the summer, just to help to connect kids to outdoors and nature.
And hi, everybody. My name's Whitney Cohen, and I also got my start in this field as an outdoor educator, and then became a middle school science teacher. And I taught in a low-income public middle school for 5 years and started a school garden there. And then I became, about 10 years ago now, I became the education director at Life Lab, which I'll talk about in a moment. And now I hold that position and run teacher trainings and develop curriculum for Life Lab. And in addition, I teach a class at UC Santa Cruz on environmental education for environmental studies majors. And so a quick overview of Life Lab, the organization I work for. Life Lab's been around since 1979. And this is our mission here: to cultivate children's love of health, learning, and nature through garden-based education. So we really focus on school gardens, bringing learning to life in these gardens. And we're located in Santa Cruz, California. So in Santa Cruz, we run programs for the children in our county at gardens all across our county, in schools and out of schools. And then all across the nation, we run educator workshops, and then we ship our curriculum. So people who are interested in school gardens often use Life Lab curriculum and Life Lab professional development.
So diving back into Kiss the Ground, I'm going to give some background as to who we are at Kiss the Ground, and kind of what we've been up to during the origins of the establishment of Kiss the Ground. So Kiss the Ground was founded a little over 5 years ago, and was inspired by a gentleman by the name of Ryland Engelhart. He learned about a solution to global warming from an ag consultant and an educator, Graham State. And this was a solution that he actually had never heard before. Ryland had considered himself, an environmentalist, just really having a solid knowledge about what the solutions were to climate change. But Graham shared a different solution that Ryland had never heard of before, which was the soil, and how powerful the soil is in helping to sequester carbon. Ryland then was moved to go and share this new information with his community, including one of the co-founders, Finian Makepeace. And he learned that a lot of people in his community didn't know about this kind of new information about soil being the key in sequestering carbon. Thus, Kiss the Ground was founded as a way to bring this message out into the world and inspire people to really understand the role that soil plays. So our mission with Kiss the Ground is to inspire participation in the regeneration of the planet, starting with the soil. And in the 5 years of existence, we have accomplished quite a bit. I've been with the organization for about a year, and so I was able to bring this curriculum to life and just really help to push it. But prior to my role with Kiss the Ground and joining the team, we have co-released a book called Kiss the Ground, and we actually have a documentary that will be coming out hopefully by the end of the year. And we have played a really vital role in helping with local policy in relation to climate change and the hauling system. And we also have, as mentioned, we released our curriculum, but we also have 5 programs within our org. Our education program, which this curriculum falls under. We have a farmland program, which helps educate farmers about regenerative agriculture and helps to support the transition from conventional ag to regenerative ag. We have a business ed program that also plays a role in bringing education to businesses, because they play a vital role in sourcing regenerative foods that can help build healthy soil. And we have a storytelling team. And I didn't mention, we have an amazing storytelling team that has released dozens of educational videos that teach about soil building practices and tell the stories that are happening out in the world in relation to soil building, and telling the stories of the farmers, telling the stories of the educators that are out there really championing this work of soil building. Lastly, we have a garden program. We started a garden in Venice, California, I think about a year into the org's kind of existence, and that is thriving and just serving as a tool to educate and connect people to the soil. So I know I shared a bit about Kiss the Ground and how we got started and our mission. And now I want to dive into why we chose to develop a curriculum. We weren't, prior to developing this curriculum, in the world of education in terms of curriculum development, but we saw an opportunity to bring this hopeful message that soil can regenerate our planet to youth. This generation is one of the first to grow up in a climate changed world and feel the deep effects of it. I mean, from droughts to floods, fires, shifts in our food supply, collapsing ecosystems, we are all experiencing the effects. And kids are growing up in this world where climate change is a daily conversation. And if you ask most kids about what the main contributor to climate change is, typically they'll say, fossil fuel, the use of fossil fuel, greenhouse gases. And most will say that the solutions to climate change is to stop burning this fossil fuel and to reduce emissions, which is true. But there's a piece of that that's missing, because even if we stopped burning fossil fuel, we would still have all of that excess carbon in the atmosphere. And so the question is, if in the perfect world, we stop burning, we stop all of the greenhouse gases and the carbon emissions, what do we do with that carbon in the atmosphere? And so that's where the soil story curriculum was developed, because the answer is in the soil. We also want to just let kids know that humans can live regeneratively. We want to empower them to live regeneratively and not just sustainably. And you might ask yourself, what do you mean by that? If you look at the definition of both, you'll see why I'm comparing regenerative to sustainability. Because the definition of sustainability is it's able to be used without being completely used or destroyed. And we hear sustainability a lot. It's built within our vocabulary as a positive thing, something that's helping to build and protect our environment. However, if you listen to that definition again, how is that really making something better? And that's why we're really pushing for regenerative, because the definition of regenerative is to renew or restore a body, a biological system after injury or a normal process. And it also means bringing into renewed existence, regenerating again. And so if you think about it, our planet, with climate change and all of the effects that I mentioned earlier, with drought, with the fires, with the extreme, shifts in our weather in our weather systems, our planet is degenerative. And so in order to get to a thriving place again, we as a human species need to start practicing regenerative practices. And one of the big ways of doing that is to build our soil. And when we can do that, when we start to build healthy soil, we will begin to rebuild fertility, which means that our food will become more dense. We'll have more nutritious food and an abundance of food, as well as biodiversity back on our land. Our water cycles will be replenished. So we talk about, you hear a lot about our depleted aquifers and our groundwater. This connects back to the drought that we're experiencing. When we can start to live regeneratively, to build our soil, we can begin to reverse some of those detrimental experiences that we're having on the planet, and we'll begin to see the water cycles returning. And then we'll, again, reverse global warming. And that is the big thing. And that ties into all of the things that I mentioned earlier about fertility and water cycles. It's the big solution is how the role that our soil plays in our climate. And the bigger picture is that we'll return our planet to a thriving and biodiverse home. I mean, who doesn't want this beautiful photo to be our reality? When you look in many parts of the land, we see desertified land. If you look on a global photo, and we'll see that a little later, you see just dark brown cover, dark brown images around most of the land on Earth. And so in order to return back to this thriving planet, we as a human species need to take action. And one of the big ways of doing that is to build healthy soil. And so carbon, we're going to talk a little bit about how carbon plays a role in all of this. So we're going to do a poll and ask you a true or false question about carbon and whether it's bad for the environment. So go ahead and participate in that poll, and we will get kind of a feedback as to what your thoughts are.
Hey everyone, so please just select one of your two choices, and we'll give it just about a minute or less, because it shouldn't take too long. We'll close the poll and see the results. Okay, we've got about 90% of the folks voting. Let's close up the poll. And can you see the results of the poll?
Yes.
Very good.
I can. So we have 6% feel that carbon is bad for the environment. And we have 94% feel that carbon, I'm sorry, yes, 6% feel like carbon is bad for the environment, and 94% feel that it's false, that carbon is not bad for the environment. Thank you all for participating. So we're going to dive into this and really help to answer that question as to whether carbon is bad. To start, and this is diving now into the first lesson of the curriculum, Earth Systems. And one of the guiding question for this lesson is, where is carbon found on Earth? Carbon is a natural, abundant, non-metallic element that is found in both organic, which is living things, and inorganic, non-living things. And it naturally flows through Earth systems through a constantly flowing cycle called the carbon cycle, which many of you are probably familiar with. The Earth system that the carbon flows through includes the atmosphere, the air above us, the biosphere, the hydrosphere, the geosphere, and the pedosphere. Carbon in the form of CO2 is present in the atmosphere in very small amounts, but it has a big impact on sustainable life on the planet. It's what helps to keep our planet, at a comfortable temperature, and a place where we can actually live on this planet. What happens is the CO2 traps radiation in the atmosphere and acts like a warm blanket around the planet, trapping heat and keeps the surface from freezing. Unfortunately, as mentioned earlier, in human behavior, the way that we live on the planet through the use of fossil fuels and other practices release carbon into the atmosphere at a rate that's greater than it would be if we weren't performing these behaviors. There's a normal natural cycle that carbon plays, and when we release it, we are actually accelerating the release of carbon, which contributes to the heating of our planet. Hence, that's where we get the term global warming. And it raises temperatures on the surface. And it's causing basically a major shift in our climate and how all of the various ecosystems and life can live on this planet. And so we're experiencing things like desertification, shifts in our water cycles, extreme droughts. All of the things I mentioned earlier are an effect of this excess carbon in our atmosphere.
Okay, so I'm going to talk you through, this is Whitney again, I'm going to talk you through the first lesson about how we engage middle school students with this concept that Jessica just fleshed out about what is carbon and where is it found on Earth. And I'll walk you through sort of the 5 stages of this lesson. And I want to start by just highlighting that all of the 5 lessons in this unit follow a 5E model of instruction. I imagine almost all of you are familiar with that, so I'll keep this brief, but basically each lesson begins with an engage, a little segment to kind of activate any student's prior knowledge about the topic and make them curious about the topic. And then we have them explore something, and that's what the photo clearly shows, but often they're exploring something physical, or sometimes watching a video, or sometimes exploring sort of a big picture question that we'll pose, but they're exploring it in a really open-ended way. Then we go into the explain phase of the lesson, where students begin to sort of articulate their understandings from their explorations and articulate the way they're thinking things work. And then we as the teachers at that time are also adding new information, providing vocabulary and new ideas for them to consider. Then the students elaborate. That's where they apply their newfound knowledge. And of course, toward the end of the lesson, of each lesson, we evaluate. And that's a time when we as the educators, but also the students themselves, get to look back and say, okay, how has our thinking changed over this time? And also as educators, we can think, how did they engage with this content as scientists? How did they do with the process of learning? So that's the model, and now I'll show you what that looks like in the context of the first lesson. So this first lesson, again, is focused on the guiding question, where is carbon found on Earth? And I would add to that also just, what is carbon? Those are kind of the guiding principles and questions that this lesson hopes to unpack. And so the engage for that, we do a vote with your feet. We present the students just like we did with you, with that poll. We present them with some statements, some true or false statements, such as carbon is bad for the environment. And then one side of the room is true, the other side is false, and they can move themselves. Our photo here is in the garden because that's where I happen to teach, but whether you're outdoors or in a classroom, they move themselves to whichever side of the room represents what they're thinking about that question. And then we share some information. So carbon is bad for the environment, and they get to move with their feet to what they think true or false, and then we share, okay, that one was false and here's why. And so we kind of assess what they already know and also make them sort of curious to understand more. Then they explore. And so these are, what's showing on your slide now are just some tools that the students are given to basically, these are some modeling tools. So they get to model the carbon cycle. We define with their help all of these 5 systems on Earth: the atmosphere, the biosphere, which has all living things on Earth, the geosphere, which is excuse me, is rocks, etc., down all the way down to into the middle of the Earth, the pedosphere, which has the soil, etc., and the hydrosphere, which has the water. And so they identify the 5 spheres, and then they cut out these arrows and these different interactions between these, and they place them based on their understanding of how they think carbon moves between these spheres. Now, in middle school, of course, they might have some understanding of some of this. For example, some of your students might at this point in their lives know that animals exhale carbon dioxide. So that would be moving carbon from the biosphere into the atmosphere. They'll also presumably have a lot of gaps in their understanding, and that's great. That's part of this, that at this time they're just sort of trying out their ideas to see what they currently understand. So here you can see on this next slide some examples of students' work. And this was the exact lesson, the exact activity I just described, but before we had the handouts. So they were just doing it with ink and colored pencils. But you can see these are students attempting to sort of explain what they already understand about the interactions between these 5 systems on Earth. Once they've done that, then we show them this video, the soil story. And this is a short video that this entire curriculum was sort of designed around. And we encourage you to watch the video. There's the link in the top left corner of your slide to watch the video as soon as this webinar is over so that you can see how it wraps around. But Jessica will give you a quick synopsis since we can't show the video here today.
Thanks, Whitney. So yeah, the soil story is a short video that our storytelling team created that really helps viewers understand the connection between soil, farming, composting, and the carbon cycle on Earth. And the video introduces a number of topics, all of which are really, as Whitney mentioned, like the curriculum is built around this video. And so there's a lot of linked points in the video that tie in really beautifully with the curriculum. And so it's a really great visual for students to get an understanding as to how carbon cycles on the planet and how it plays a role in climate change. Our narrator for this video is Pashon Murray, and she's the founder of Detroit Dirt. It's a nonprofit that she founded. And she really is great and dives into the connection that soil plays in climate change. And a little bit about her program. Her org, it's an urban renewal program that she basically closes the loop in creating zero waste. So it's a composting nonprofit. And so, yeah, as Whitney mentioned, I would highly recommend watching that great video after this webinar, so you can have an idea as to how it presents the concept and how it connects to the curriculum.
Thanks, Jessica. I will just say, I'll go back to say, one of my favorite things about this video is actually just these little dots that you see, and you'll understand this so much better when you watch the video, but those represent carbon, and it really helps visualize. I think it would help children, but also adults visualize how carbon moves between the spheres. And so the video will show, factories burning fossil fuels and carbon moving into the atmosphere, and then it will show those same little carbon dots getting absorbed by plants into the biosphere through photosynthesis. And so it kind of just helps students, I think, visualize some of these scientific processes that we can't see with the naked eye. So following the video, this is when we get into the explain section of the lesson, where students already had made models, but now they get to add new information based on what they saw in the video and things they may have not remembered or not known before, so they can add those to their models that they were making. And we start kind of by focusing. What you're seeing here are slides that you'll have access to so that you can show these to your students. So some slides to place those arrows and words and check their models against this one. And then they also have some new arrows and new words to add that show human activity and how that's moving carbon up into the atmosphere, whether it's tilling soil and leaving bare land, or burning fossil fuels, or clearing out forests and burning plant waste. So they have some sense of the carbon cycle and why it's getting out of balance based on human activity. From there, the elaborate and evaluate of this lesson is, I didn't mention this, but that modeling activity that they're doing where they're cutting out and moving arrows, that's all done in a group. They're doing it in small groups. And then this final piece is individual, and this is a chance for the students to look at the models they made and then reflect on their learning by making their own individual model where the colorful drawing is. And then on the second page, answering the question where it says lesson 1, where is carbon found on Earth? So providing a short answer based on what they learned during that lesson. I'll just point out that handout 1-3, that is the part of the evaluate for every lesson. So then in lesson 2, they can add to their model, and then they'll reflect on the role of plants in the carbon cycle. In lesson 3, they'll add to their model and reflect on soil in the carbon cycle. And then on lesson 4, they'll do it again, add more to their model and reflect on the role of farmers in the carbon cycle. So essentially, the design of this unit is to start with lesson 1, helping them understand what carbon is and how it cycles on Earth. And then the following 3 lessons each highlight one little part of that cycle. First, the role of plants, then the role of soil microbes, and then the role of farmers. And then the final lesson is the role that we, the consumers, play in the carbon cycle.
So as we know, in lesson 1, we had an understanding of the carbon cycle and what carbon is. In lesson 2, we now dive into photosynthesis and how kind of what the role that plants play in the carbon cycle. But in order to, before you can ask that question, you have to understand, where do trees come from? When you think about it, trees and plants are built from thin air through a process called photosynthesis. It's pretty magical because it basically just, especially for a student, understanding that, you know, through drawing in carbon, sunlight, and water is part of the process of photosynthesis. It's a really fascinating concept that, you know, kids really get a kick out of. And this lesson really helps them dive into the full understanding of how photosynthesis is connected to the process. So the carbon dioxide being used to sequester from the atmosphere is part of the carbon cycle through photosynthesis. It gets converted to a liquid sugar, which is called carbohydrates. And the carbs are used to form the plant structure, and the plant also then stores any excess sugars for later usage. And so it essentially is just pulling in the carbon, the water, and this, you know, the sunlight in order to create its own energy source and grow. And so a lot of times, I think this is a new, not a new concept for people, but if you ask people, as Whitney will dive into this really great video, a lot of people don't know how plants are formed. Many people will think that it comes from the soil. And if you think about it, if it came from the soil, we would have holes all throughout the land. And so it's a fascinating concept that I think a lot of even adults, and as Whitney will dive into, even more, you know, elite educated people still don't really have an understanding.
Yeah, so photosynthesis can be really tricky to teach because I think most people, you know, are familiar, almost all adults are familiar with that word and probably would say, oh yeah, I can define it, I know about that. But what we find out when we look closer is there's a lot of misunderstandings about photosynthesis. And there's a great video. If you haven't seen it, this would just be fun for you to watch. It's not part of the curriculum, but I just thought I'd plug it because I think it's really interesting. It's called Private Universe Photosynthesis. And basically, somebody went to Harvard on graduation day and they handed this big, heavy log to many different Harvard graduates and said, where did the plant get this matter? And it's just hilarious. And people say all sorts of things, but not one of them, I'm sure the video is edited, but not one of these Harvard graduates mentions the air or carbon dioxide at all. And so it's really interesting to realize how much misunderstanding there is around photosynthesis. And that's not surprising because we can't see it happen. And so even though it's so fundamental to our Earth and to our life process, we can't witness it directly, and so it's hard for people to understand. So how do we involve students, middle school students, with this concept and help them understand it? Again, we use the 5E learning cycle, and I'll show you how that looks in this lesson. So we engage students with that exact same activity that's in that video. We hand them a big heavy log and ask them to lift it up with their hands, and ideally it's so heavy they have to work together to lift it. And then we ask them, where does this matter come from? And they have a chance to just pair share about that and consider what they currently think about where the matter comes from. And every student is different, but often you'll hear the answers of soil, water, sunlight. You know, they'll just kind of brainstorm things they've heard of, nutrients, things like that. Then we go into the explore, and I will just say at that time, we do not correct any misunderstandings. We just are, you know, listening for what they currently think about where plant matter comes from. Then we do a demonstration for the students with bromomethyl blue. And you can see the image of this in the lower left-hand column. Basically, you fill 3 test tubes with this bromomethyl blue solution. And then you blow, and that solution is a carbon indicator. So it looks blue, and then you blow into it with a straw. And as you can see, the 2 greenish tubes have been blown into. So when you exhale carbon dioxide into the solution, it will change color. And so the teacher does that in front of the students, and the students have a handout where they are drawing what they're seeing and then attempting to model their understanding of why that happened. So they are using arrows and words to try to explain together in teams what they think happened to change the color. Then we clarify that what changed the color is carbon, the carbon in our breath, this chemical reacts with that and turns it green. And then we ask the students, how can we change this back to blue? And they brainstorm possibilities. And if no one mentions it, we bring up putting a plant into one of the tubes. If they come up with other things, you can also test out other things. So you could make a lot of different tubes and try, if they have different ideas that they want to test to turn it back to blue, by all means, why not? They can do that. But one of the tubes, you'll put a plant back in, and over time, that plant will absorb the carbon, and so the solution will turn back to blue. And fortunately, Kiss the Ground saw the write-up of this and they made a little instructional video. So before you teach this lesson, if you're interested in teaching this, if you want to just watch a little 3-minute demonstration of how exactly to do this, that's available in the lesson, and you'll be able to watch a little video just so that you understand exactly how to run the demonstration. Anyhow, once they've seen that it turns back to blue, the students are invited to try to explain what happened, why did it turn back to blue? And essentially, they're given some new information, as you can see in slide 2.1 here. They're given some new information to understand that leaves have stomata, which actually are a part of the plant that helps them pull in carbon dioxide. And so they're learning that plants take in carbon dioxide, and that's part of where their matter comes from. In the elaborate section, we dive into that process, but on the molecular and the atomic level. And so students are given these little atoms, as you can see in the picture, and they start by trying to arrange them into carbon dioxide and water molecules. And then once they have all of those molecules, they rearrange them to make carbohydrates or sugars, the C6H12O6. And so they rearrange them, and they, really physically learn and understand that all of these atoms were rearranged, none were lost, none were gained, but something new was made by rearranging the atoms. And finally, in the evaluate of the lesson, they have a question there on that same handout about what role do plants play in the carbon cycle. And our goal at that point is for them to understand that plants pull carbon in from the atmosphere. And also in the evaluate of this lesson, we go back to the engage and we ask them that plant part mystery. We ask them to reflect on what they had thought at the beginning of the lesson and how has your thinking changed about where plants get their matter. And so they share their new understanding of where plants get their matter.
And now we jump into lesson 3, and this lesson covers healthy soil and dives deeper into soil's connection to all of this. We lead with a guiding question, which is what role do soil microbes play in the carbon cycle? First, I want to go over what is a soil microbe. Microbes are essentially like a microscopic organism that is part of the soil food web, and it's made up of living things that's part of a thriving community. And the community includes a wide range of microorganisms that are seen and unseen that help to grow, that eat, reproduce, live, and die. So they're part of just the natural cycle. And with microorganisms, we don't see them, but they're thriving, and there's a lot under our feet. And this is another really fun opportunity for kids to dive deeper into the life under the soil and the role that it plays in the carbon cycle.
I think this is still you, Jessica.
Yeah, so we have healthy soil built from thin air, and just really connecting back to how soil is built through the photosynthesis process, the development of carbohydrates that then get stored in the soil. We have other active living things that help to participate in the life under the soil to help not only the trees and the plants thrive, but also to act as carbon stores, which is really why, one of the main reasons for the development of this curriculum is just to really understand how can we store carbon in the soil. The carbon is stored in the soil in Earth's vegetation, and it comes from the atmosphere. And it's part, again, of that carbon cycle. So fungi, mycorrhizal fungi, the bacteria, all play a role in helping to store the carbon in the soil and essentially act as a store for long, significant periods of time, helping to remove it from the atmosphere. So I think we went through this. You can bypass this one a bit.
Okay, great, thanks. Mm-hmm. All right, so now I'll talk about how we engage middle schoolers with this concept. So when they're looking at the role of soil microbes in the carbon cycle, the first thing we want students to understand is this sort of interdependent exchange between plants and soil microbes. So to engage, we just help students define interdependence. And the way we do that is by having them reflect on an example from their own lives of a time when they helped someone or someone helped them. So we start with just real big picture, what is interdependence and what does it mean in your life? Then for the explore, all of the students have a pile of dirt and a pile of thriving soil, of relatively inert dirt like you see in the picture, and then a scoop of really nice rich soil that's full of life. And we ask them to just compare and what's similar here and what's different. And one of the things they'll surely notice is that the really thriving soil that you might collect from a local community garden or school garden or compost pile will be full of life. It'll be really fluffy and lots of air pockets in there, and then often they'll have some little invertebrates in there. And so we use that to introduce the idea that the soil, when we think of sort of ecosystems or biomes, we often think of big ones, like the intertidal biome or that kind of thing, or the redwood forest, but that the soil is its own biome. It's this whole thriving ecosystem with lots of living things, some of which we can see with the naked eye and many of which are microscopic, but they're still there, they're alive, they're thriving, and they're interacting. And so we showed that in the explain portion of this lesson, we show a video called The Living Soil Beneath Our Feet. And this is a video from the California Academy of Sciences. And what it really shows is how trees and plants will send carbohydrates, of course made from the carbon in the atmosphere and water. They'll send that down to these microbes. And they do that in order to feed the microbes, because the soil microbes in turn will use that food and fuel to energize their growth and development, and then they'll in return send nutrients and access to water back to the trees. And so this video is perfect for visualizing this, but it really shows things like tree roots connecting and wrapped with mycorrhizal fungi wrapped around the tree roots, and this exchange happening where the fungus is getting the carbohydrates and the tree is getting nutrients and water in exchange. And so it's this interdependence. And in the elaborate, after they watch the video, they basically focus on this question: how are plants and soil microbes interdependent? And they take notes on the information they've gathered from the video, from their soil observation, from some slides that we showed, like the one you can see on slide 3-4 there on the right, from their own background knowledge, discussion, and anywhere else. So all of the information they've taken in on this. And then once we feel like they've really got this concept that plants and soil microbes are interdependent and they kind of feed each other, then we head toward, so what does this mean for the carbon cycle? And of course, as Jessica explained, what it means for the carbon cycle is that that carbon that the plants were able to pull in can now get sequestered in the soil, because when the trees and plants send that down and feed it to the soil microbes, then the soil microbes stay in the soil. And even when they die and decompose, they're in the soil. And so it locks that carbon down into the soil for a long, long time. And that's why this is so important in terms of the carbon cycle and climate change.
So now we jump into lesson 4, which makes the connection of food and farming. In the previous 3 lessons, we talked about more of the plants, the carbon, and the soil. And now we dive into like mainly humans' influence on this whole system, farmers. With the guiding question, we ask, what role do farmers play in the carbon cycle? And we learned earlier that plants play a vital role in the carbon cycle. Roughly 37% of the Earth's entire land area is available and suitable for agricultural land. And about 1/3 of this area, which is about 11%, is used for crops. So there's a huge opportunity for farmers to play an active role in basically balancing the carbon cycle. The balance is, the balance, roughly 1/4 of Earth's land area is pasture land. It includes wild foraging crops, animals, open land use. So again, just really diving into how much of the surface of land around the planet is used towards for food production. So there's a big opportunity. Unfortunately, the farming practices that most farmers use destroys the soil through tilling the soil, through applying chemicals, growing monocrops, things like that. It's not in alignment with the natural systems that are in place, and it actually releases more carbon into the atmosphere. And so in this lesson, we make the connection of soil practices and how that connects to human health. Because it's a really great way to bring it back to humans and how we are affected by the poor land management around the world. So when we look at human health and soil, we realize there's a lot of similarities. I mean, when we look at the environment, the food and chemicals, both soil and humans are affected by all three of those things. And there's really not much of a difference in regards to the needs. And researchers, when we hear a lot about the microbiome, researchers are understanding that the human microbiome is an unappreciated organ. It may even be more appropriate to view the body as a superorganism composed of like a symbiotic microorganism. We talk about probiotics, which are extremely important for the function of the gut and the function of the body. It's also important for the soil to have healthy bacteria to thrive and to grow healthy food. And in the soil, which serves as the key source for our food production, if our soil is depleted of microorganisms and is not a healthy, thriving environment, the food that is grown in that soil is affected. And that is the food that we eat. And so there's that connection that that students are able to make in understanding how important soil is to human health and environmental health.
All right, so now we try to dive into that in our lesson with middle schoolers. So the way we engage with this concept with them is we show this slide that you see, slide 4.3, and we actually reveal this kind of one piece at a time, and they're trying to interpret what they're seeing. And essentially what it comes out to is, oh, there are a whole lot of bacteria living in our digestive system. And so we kind of make that comparison that Jessica just made, that we're not that different from the soil, and we also have a lot of bacteria that help us stay healthy. Then for the Explore, students actually just get to eat some farm fresh produce. So we have some suggestions. This can be as simple as washing and chopping up a carrot and everyone having a little slice, or some much more elaborate options of doing a blind taste test or making a smoothie or that kind of thing. But either way, the idea is that they either harvest something from a school or community garden to eat, or just enjoy something that was local and seasonal, that may have been bought at the grocery store or farmer's market. And as they're eating or right afterwards, they reflect on how the soil microbes helped bring nutrients to this food and helped the plant grow the food, and then how the microbes in our bodies actually help us digest and use those nutrients from that food. Then we kind of pivot to say, so, you know, if we're taking all of this food from the soil, from the plants that grow in the soil, how can we give back to the soil? And we use a video called the Compost Story video to share this concept that compost is a way to give nutrients back to the soil, and also really promote healthy soil microbes, which in turn, of course, help sequester carbon. So we share the Compost Story video. And after the video, students are given these colorful, you can see handout 4.2 for the Elaborate Evaluate, they're given these colorful cards that each have a different agricultural practice, and they sort them. So they work into teams to sort them based on if they think each practice is soil building or soil depleting. And so they take a look at it, they read the words, and they discuss together what they think and why. And so they're trying to use their new understanding of regenerative agriculture to decide if each practice would be soil building or soil depleting. And then of course they have their lesson 4 question on that assessment sheet. What role do farmers play in the carbon cycle? So they reflect on how farming practices affect the carbon cycle, and they update their visual model to show that new understanding. Little side note to Jessica and Bruce, I must have downloaded this before the poll questions because those slides are not in mine. So Bruce, I don't know if you should show those poll questions 2, 3, and 4, but I don't have the slides that show them.
Right. Well, perhaps we'll just move along then.
I think that's probably best. Okay, thank you. Oh gosh, look, here they are. They're just in a different order.
Here they are.
Okay, they are here. They were just in a different order than my printout. Okay, so here's a poll question. You can, these will be real quick, Bruce. You could just put them up and people can vote very quickly.
Sure. So first take a look at compost, and then I'll put up the poll to vote. So this is compost. You can, okay. All right. And here are the results.
All right. All right. I think, let me see. Yeah, I think for the sake of time, we could probably skip the other 2 polls, but I just want to highlight that the reason we did these as polls is to show you this is what the students are doing. So they're looking at these, they're trying to decide in groups, is it soil building or soil depleting and why? And then they share out and discuss, and there's sort of a science talk where they get to support their reasoning with evidence, or support their claims, excuse me, with evidence. All right, Jessica, this is to you for lesson 5 overview.
Yeah, so lesson 5 is our final lesson in this curriculum. And as Whitney beautifully outlined, this final lesson really allows students to take action. They have an opportunity now that they've learned about the role that carbon plays on the planet, the carbon cycle, photosynthesis, the soil's connection to that, how farming connects to soil building practices, what role they can play in the carbon cycle and helping to build healthy carbon sequestering soil. And so typically, as I mentioned earlier, students typically look at fossil fuel as a way to address our climate issues, which is great. But in addition, we need to find a way to draw down carbon that's up in the atmosphere already. And so this last lesson really gives students an opportunity to get creative, think outside the box, and take action as a group.
So the 5 E's of this lesson, we start with an engage, which is actually similar to how we started this webinar. There's a chance to tell the sort of origin story of Kiss the Ground and the idea that this small group of people became passionate about this and all that they've achieved since then to make change in how we treat our soil. And then the explore is to head out around campus, around the school campus, and do a little environmental impact survey. And this is very open-ended. It might, depending on your campus, there might be some just visibly obvious places that soil could be built, things could be done to rejuvenate the soil, or this might be more about scheduling a time that they could talk with the grounds people or the custodian about the different plants and patches of soil on campus. But they're basically looking around their campus for places where something could be done to rejuvenate the soil, or where more plants could be grown, or anything else that they could see that could happen to make the campus better at sequestering carbon. And then the rest of the lesson is really, it's not so much a lesson as a facilitated process for helping students select a project that they want to take on and plan it together and then implement that project. And so we have some example projects, everything from something simple like starting a worm compost bin in the classroom for lunch scraps, all the way to something like starting an entire school garden or finding a place to plant trees. So there's really a whole wide range of things that students could take on anything to basically promote healthy soil and healthy plants on their campus or in their neighborhoods. And then as the teacher, our role is really to just facilitate their process in small groups of actually implementing the project that they've identified.
And so I wanted to share one inspiring story that came out of the curriculum. During our pilot period of testing out the curriculum, we had a school in Los Angeles, the New West Charter Middle School, piloted the curriculum in one of their classes. And out of that, the students wanted to start a worm composting bin. And they also wanted to revive some planter boxes that they had on campus because they're in a very, just a city, just like, I guess, concrete rich community where there's not much soil access. There's, they don't have access to land where they can really garden in the ground. And so they wanted to utilize what they had on property that wasn't really getting much attention and just revive that space and start to sequester carbon with what they had. But there were two students in particular that wanted to take it a step further, Annika and Tesfana. They were really inspired by this curriculum and wanted to make sure that all of the students on their campus had access and had the opportunity to learn about the role that soil plays in addressing climate change, because this was just more of a pilot class that was taught to a group of 30 students. And so they worked with their teacher and the administrative staff to develop an on-campus elective offering for any students to take this class and learn about the soil and the soil story. And so, just one example of many that will come from this curriculum, but it's really beautiful to empower and allow students to just take this on and see what inspires them and what actions they're inspired to do in order to help to build healthy soil.
And we just wanted to highlight that if I imagine some of you are really well versed in project-based learning, and if it's new for any of you, and or if you're looking for tools to facilitate successful student-run projects, this Buck Institute for Education is a stellar resource, and they have a lot of online resources, including student handouts, for example, to help teams create goals and timelines for doing each task and that kind of thing. So if you're looking for ways to actually structure facilitating student-led projects, there's some really useful resources at this website. All right, so we wanted to just take a moment to give you a moment to reflect together as a community. So we're going to ask you just in the comments box here, which is over in your control panel, to take a minute to answer either of these questions. You don't have to go in order. So whichever one is speaking to you, take a moment to share an answer so that you can all share with each other, and then we'll move toward Q&A after that.
Okay, so we have some responses coming in. Jessica and or Whitney, would you like to read some of these off, or would you like me to?
I feel like you better, because all I can see is yours.
Okay, sure.
I'm not sure why.
No, that's fine. Well, one is that managed grazing is dubiously regenerative. I highly encourage people to look carefully at those practices, particularly in terms of yield per acre, biodiversity, and manure management. That's an interesting comment. One educator is going to share the resources with the teacher that she works with. Another educator says that they want to do more in classroom with soil. And another one says, I plan on handing my students wood and asking them how it was formed. So she's watched the video before, as a number of us have. Another educator mentions connecting the soil to people. Soil is affected by the same thing that we are. We need to have more students learn about this. Another educator mentioned that she's downloaded the curriculum and will look through it. She likes the lessons already. So there are quite a few things that are written here.
Great. Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't see them, but I'm glad that I'm hoping you all can see each other's, and thanks for sharing some of those out. All right, so I think now we're going to open it up to questions. If there were any, Bruce, you can share those with us, and then we'll close.
Very good. So if any folks have any specific questions that they'd like to ask to Jessica or Whitney, please type them into your question boxes now. We'll take a few of them, and then for just due to time, we may stop the recording, but we may continue those depending on how many we get in. So I tell you what, while some folks take a moment, I'm going to take a second here just to show you some additional resources that will be available and will be sending out to everyone. Are you guys able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. So for those of you who are interested in learning more about pre-industrial versus post-industrial carbon, there's a terrific hands-on game called The Incredible Carbon Journey that I recommend for you through NOAA's National Ocean Service. Also, there's a wonderful resource called Visualizing Carbon Pathways. And don't worry, you'll see all of these links in the archive you'll be getting a copy of. There's also a great hands-on demonstration and air quotes experiment called carbon dioxide removal, which is one that Whitney, I believe you described earlier, which is available through the American Museum of Natural History. It's a terrific resource. Also, for those of you who are interested in doing a little bit more involved work with some of your students on having them understand their impact, there's a great project called the Lifestyle Project, as well as a carbon calculator activity, so that educators can see how they are impacting carbon sequestration or putting more carbon out there. It's very good stuff. And if you want some more excellent resources on the carbon cycle, lifestyle choices, agriculture, and climate change, I really do recommend that you check out cleannet.org. They have terrific educational resources that cover this and many, many other activities, videos, demonstrations for all grade bands. It's very easily searchable. I'm going to turn this back over to you, Whitney, and let's see if folks have some questions for us now. So, okay, let's see. So, one question is, do you have any material in the curriculum that teaches the relationship between the soil microbiome and gut health to maintain human health?
Yeah. Jessica, should I take a first answer on that?
You can go for it.
We do. So lesson 4 is the lesson that dives into that. And I would say that within the curriculum, there's sort of a surface look at that. We think it's fascinating and we wanted to acknowledge it. So we have some slides that help students understand the gut biome. And then we have some slides to help explain how that connects to a healthy soil microbiome. In addition, in this lesson, I'm shuffling papers a little bit here to make sure I'm right, but there are some additional resources recommended, including some readings students can do that dive into that in more detail. So I would say we do it fairly briefly to just highlight that these biomes exist and they support one another, and then we eat something and celebrate it in that way. But we have linked to some resources within the curriculum itself where people can learn more about the details of that. Jessica, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, no, I was going to just share that it is discussed exactly what you said. We do touch on it, but it's not a deep dive. And certainly through that introduction in the lesson, you can dive into some additional resources and material that can really help students get a full understanding of how the biomes support each other.
Great. You know, one thing that a lot of people have been asking, and I confess, I know that you mentioned it at the beginning, but I didn't see it specifically. This curriculum is free through Kiss the Ground, is that correct?
Yes, and I apologize for not mentioning that early on.
Yes.
It
Can you,
absolutely.
Whitney, can you actually pull up the Kiss the Ground site on your screen, and can you show folks where they can download it for free? The curriculum is available for free. And while you're doing that on your screen, I'd like to let everyone know that slides of all of today's presentation are on the NOAA Planet Stewards archive site. We're also archiving this so that everybody can receive a copy. You'll get a copy in about a week. This will be coming out in an email to you. So if you have any specific questions to that effect, you can let me know, but we will be sending this to you. Okay, Whitney, back to you.
Okay, I'm so glad you asked that. What an oversight on our part.
I know.
It's free, and here it is. So you can see the link. Can everybody see that in the top of in my browser, basically? There's the link, kisstheground.com/our-work/#education. And then you click download curriculum and you get the whole thing. And that includes handouts, slides, and then the links to the videos.
Everything they could possibly want.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Terrific.
Yeah, and if you don't remember, I mean, I know your that link is pretty small, and if you don't remember that, you can just do a quick search on the main page from the website and just type in curriculum, and it'll lead you to that same page landing. But yes, it is free, and thanks to our amazing sponsors, we are able to provide this for free to our educators to help our students understand soil and the role it plays in climate change.
Great. So another question that we had from folks is, hang on one second. How long do these lessons span usually? Do they run like one lesson per day over the span of a week? I mean, do they project into the next week? I mean, how is it recommended that they be presented as a unit?
Great question. Jessica, should I jump in on that? You want to start?
Yeah, you can jump in on it. I mean, I think we have it written down somewhere in the curriculum that it's suggested that you give yourself about an hour, but I know we've had teachers who have a little bit more time than an hour, and you could easily extend these lessons beyond an hour. And we've had educators who meet with their students on a weekly basis, and so they extend it to like a 5-week and beyond unit, because obviously that fifth lesson could take more than an hour to address and really take on that project-based piece. I'll let you go ahead and dive in any more, Whitney, if there's more thoughts that you have with that.
Just that we tried to design it to fit in with a typical middle school schedule. So the lessons are 45 minutes to an hour long, assuming that that's probably roughly the amount of time a science teacher sees their students, and they can work 5 consecutive days. But if you don't have your students consecutive days, it could also work to teach one each week or something like that until you're finished. And as Jessica said, the only exception to this is lesson 5, Take Action, which is absolutely not a kind of 1 hour thing. That's more about, there's probably 45 minutes to an hour of just sort of setting it up and helping your students brainstorm ideas in teams, and then the follow-up can be as elaborate as you have time for. So if they're designing a really big project, it could be an all-year thing where they're going to work in teams and develop a whole school garden, etc. Or it could be much smaller scale. But either way, that one is more than a lesson. It's more of a suggestion for extended work.
And something I want to add to that is I believe built into the 5th lesson, the resources that are available, we have a couple of suggested grant opportunities to help with funding of some of these projects. Especially Whitney mentioned, some of these projects could be pretty elaborate, and if funding is an issue, we definitely would love to help to provide some of the resources that are available to fund the projects.
Other questions?
Yep, I'm just trying to put the link to the curriculum and sent it to the whole audience. Okay, very good. So check that out. Yes, there are more questions. One question we actually have is if you can elaborate on specific criteria which create distinctions between sustainable and regenerative agricultural practices, because there are differences.
Most definitely. I can touch on that a little bit. I mean, in terms of like the agricultural practices and talking about sustainability, I mean, think about just in regards to soil building. You either have a farmer who is not helping to improve the soil, but also not really depleting the soil. But if you look at soil that maybe that farmer is already working on soil that is not in the healthiest, thriving state, they're not helping to build the biodiversity in the soil and the biodiversity above ground. And so you think about that would be more of like a sustainable state for a farmer. If you're already in a thriving state, yes, we can then start talking about sustainability and just continue just kind of on autopilot and just practicing those, just staying within those practices to maintain a healthy state. But if you're in, say, a degenerative state where the soil is depleted and you're not really doing any additional harm, but you're not improving it, that's where you would use the terminology sustainability. And so that's kind of where we plugged in regenerative and helping to improve the system, helping to bring it out of a state where it's not thriving. And so when we talk about land usage with tilling and monocrops, for example, monocrops are not found in a natural environment. You have biodiversity. And so really helping to bring back biodiversity to the land and bringing back the grazing animals to start practicing regenerative practices that help to build healthy soil, grow healthy food, and just really support the whole environment of our food system.
Great. Okay, well, I thank you so much. I want to take a moment now just to go back for a second and remind everyone that to go check your email. Everyone's gotten a link to our post-webinar poll. Please do it right now. Well, not right this second, but when we're done with the webinar. We want to make sure we very much value your feedback, and we'll be passing any relevant feedback back on to our presenters so that they can learn from you. And that's really important because we are a community and we all learn from each other. In addition, I want to make sure that for those of you who come in late, and there were a few folks who came in late, I'd like to remind you that NOAA Planet Stewards and the National Earth Science Teachers Association will be having an elementary school level webinar series at the end of this month. It's running from September 24th through the 27th. We have the titles here: Game Design, Simulations and Models, teaching students about extreme weather and preparedness, engaging students with a three-dimensional learning sequence. All of these are going to be occurring at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll be sending out more information about this later on over the course of this month, probably in the next week or so. So if you have not yet signed up for the NOAA Planet Stewards email list, just you can type into your Google search NOAA Planet Stewards, you get to our page, sign up for our email list, and we'll be getting you this information. So while I sort of load up our moment of Zen photograph as we sort of look to ending up our webinar over here, and I have this picture here because we're sort of all beginning to take this new path toward the start of the academic year. And it's a twisting, winding path through the woods, but there's lots of stuff to see, and it's very exciting. We never know what we're going to encounter. I have a closing question for Jessica and Whitney. And what we had was, do you have any interesting anecdotes, funny anecdotes perhaps, of experiences that you've had in teaching this curriculum to little kids?
Think about that. Go ahead and jump in, Whitney, if you have anything. I'm taking a moment to think.
Yeah, I'm thinking too. I have something that is related. I got two actually that are related. So when I was a middle school teacher, I did not yet have this curriculum, but I taught some similar content. And I remember as a middle school teacher, I had an 8th grader who picked a strawberry out of our school garden, and he held it up and he said, "This tastes just like a real strawberry." And he was totally serious. And I realized that he hadn't really made the connection that food that grows in the earth is real food, just like he imagined the food that you get in the grocery store is real food. And I think that kind of illustrates how important bringing this outside, giving students hands-on experience with soil and plants, et cetera, can be, so that they can really understand how we are connected to the natural world.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think I have one that was really fascinating with a elementary school student that I was working with their classroom. We were in the garden and we're talking about just waste. And when you look at worms and you have the vermicompost, and their waste is actually benefiting the composition of the soil, and you have your grazing animals, your chicken manure, and that is that plays a vital role in helping to build soil health. And just the kids' reaction to really understanding and it clicking that like there really is no waste, and poop is a healthy, beneficial, nutrient for soil. It was just so fascinating, and there were a lot of giggles, but then it just settled in that like there really is no waste in nature, and really making that connection that with the systems that we do develop some form of waste, but in the natural system there is nothing that gets wasted.
Okay. Well, with that closing thought, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us this evening for our Planet Stewards webinar. I very much want to thank our presenters, Jessica and Whitney, with Kiss the Ground and with Life Lab. The work you are doing is so very important, and the resources you've presented are wonderful. They will be shared with everyone through our video archive and also through our slides, which are available to everyone. And thank you just for taking time out of your afternoons and evenings after a very busy day to come and join and to share with us. And much thanks to all of you educators who are doing the hard work every day in the trenches with the next generation. We all appreciate it.
Absolutely. And can I add one more thing, Bruce, before we
Of course
all sign off? And just if we are available here, feel free to reach out. My contact is on the website. If there are any questions or you need additional support with bringing this curriculum into the classroom, we are here to support and provide technical support and just additional resources. So don't hesitate to reach out with questions or comments.
Yes, and I will be forwarding, as I mentioned earlier, I will be forwarding all questions that are relevant and pertinent to Jessica and to Whitney, so they can get back to you personally.
Excellent. Thank you, Bruce.
Well, thanks so much. I wish everyone a good evening if you're on the East Coast, and a good afternoon if you're on the West Coast. We look forward to seeing
Thank you,
you again
Bruce.
soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Whitney.
Thank you, Whitney. Okay, bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.